We've gotten a variety of new information on Assassin's Creed Valhalla, from interviews covering longships and raids to settlements and side activities. In case you missed it, this is the third in a series of videos where I cover every piece of need-to-know information on Assassin's Creed Valhalla. If you missed the first two parts, click the card in the top right corner to check them out. On the topic of longships and raids, we got a lot of insight from French news outlet jayvee. We now know that the longship we'll be using in Valhalla is called the ๊eɪvɔːr. There were several different types of Viking longships, but the ๊eɪvɔːr typically supported 70 to 80 raiders and measured nearly 100 feet. The ๊eɪvɔːr is mostly known for the carving at the prow of the ship, which depicted monsters such as dragons, which is where the name ๊eɪvɔːr comes from, and snakes. These allegedly protected the ship and crew, warding off terrible sea monsters of Norse mythology. Historians theorize that these carvings might have had some sort of ritualistic meaning, and there are more theories that these carvings were used to strike fear into the Vikings' enemies, because when you're getting raided, that's the first thing you would see poking out of the fog in the English countryside along the rivers is that dragon head. We know we'll be able to customize the figureheads, so I'm very interested to see which options we'll have available. It's confirmed that we'll have 8 companions or Vikings aboard the ๊eɪvɔːr with us. So these will be a variety of characters that we've met throughout the story, that we actually know their names and faces that we can interact with within our settlement. And very similar to the Adrestia from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, we can summon the ๊eɪvɔːr anywhere near a shore, near water, whether it's for a full-on raid to plunder for resources or just to tackle a bandit camp along the rivers. However, we can't call our raid team from just anywhere. It's not like the system in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood or Revelations where your brothers were pretty much anywhere you could call them at any time for an arrow storm. You have to be near water because those companions are linked to the ๊eɪvɔːr. We already knew there wouldn't be naval combat, but now we have more insight on why. It's because Ubisoft wanted to be faithful to history. Longships just didn't have ranged weaponry. That's not what they were designed to do. And because of that, we will not see shooting or any kind of mechanic like that as we saw in, Black Flag, Rogue, Origins, and Odyssey. Instead, the ๊eɪvɔːr is meant to be our horse on the river, used as a tactical advantage of reaching places far into the English countryside for raiding. The impact of the Viking raids along rivers and shores was unprecedented, and as the player, we are supposed to feel very powerful in these situations. But on the flip side, we are forced to be more careful when we're away from shore. When we don't have our backup, we can't call our Vikings, and we don't have our ๊eɪvɔːr to just get out of there if we need to. It'll be interesting to see how being away from our longship is going to affect gameplay. We now know that our longship has a map, and we can use that to scan along the countryside for places to raid or trade. We don't know what the meaning of this is. It could mean that we can just look at the map in order to find places, or we can send out a pulse to mark that stuff on our map or our HUD. It suggested that who we take along in our raids could play a bigger role than in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Whoever we bring along, we can hang out with them on the ๊eɪvɔːr, and their personalities persist even after they're on a raid with Eivor. We're going to hear a lot more from the Vikings than in Odyssey. We have a lot of great information on the environment and activities in the world of Valhalla from tweets and interviews. Creative director Ashraf Ismail confirmed that we'll be able to take part in drinking and dice games. We first saw these minigames pop up in Assassin's Creed 3, and they were more of a fun side activity in order to pass the time. You could place bets, and there was typically a difficulty curve depending on which opponent you were facing, so perhaps we'll see some similar mechanics with these minigames. In terms of exploration, we'll get to explore deep, forgotten caves. We've almost always been able to explore caves, reaching back to the layers of Romulus in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, but it's been a little more prevalent in the recent entries. I'm interested to see how they implement it in Valhalla. In addition to Hadrian's Wall, we'll get to visit Puzzlewood, which is an ancient woodland site that shows evidence of iron ore mining dating back to the Roman period. It contains strange rock formations, secret caves, and ancient trees. Now, this is located near Gloucestershire, hopefully I'm saying that right, which according to some maps that I've looked at, should be in Mercia territory during the time of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. When asked if Valhalla would have forts and camps that would regenerate enemies to fight like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Ash kinda dodged the question and said there are many factions fighting over land in this area. He said there's a shifting of ownership as time moves forward, but it respects historical precedent and the needs of the narrative. It's very easy to look at that and take it any different direction. I read this as, yeah, it looks like some stuff may refill, but it may be different factions that exist in the area based on what's happening in the story. We've had a lot of different speculation on the size of the game, but Ashraf said we should not expect a smaller scale with Valhalla. It's a different vision that focuses on quality over quantity of destinations and things to do. In terms of raw content, he said it's still a very generous offering. It's just the way that this content will be consumed is different, so it's genuinely hard to compare. In an interview with YouTuber Julien Chiez, producer Julien Laferrière said the map is a bit bigger than Odyssey. This is including the map of England and a good chunk of Norway, plus additional secret areas that they wouldn't reveal yet. When compared to managing your homestead in Assassin's Creed 3, your villa in 2, or rebuilding Rome in AC Brotherhood, settlements are much more involved in Valhalla. They're central to the adventure and the narrative. So Ubisoft hopes that players will embrace managing it fully because that's at the heart of this experience. The more I hear about this, the more it reminds me of the camp in Red Dead Redemption 2. This next bit is a rough translation, so I want to put a little asterisk on this one. It was originally in French, but I believe that producer Julien Laferrière was saying that unlike Templar dens in Revelations, we can't lose fortresses. Once we capture them, they are going to be ours. However, the game mechanics will change as we do more of them. So it's more like the Borgia Towers, for example. Once you capture that region, it is the assassins from then on. We also know that assaults are always linked to a quest arc, so we're not going to go and assault a fortress without it being linked to the narrative in some way. When crafting a lot of the optional content, Ash said that different parts of England had different practices, beliefs, and ways of living life. Ubisoft used those details and were meticulous. They want people to discover it because there's a lot of deep storytelling in all of it. There's a lot for people to see, and Ubisoft wants them to experience it. Particularly, Ash wants every single hour of content to be worth it. Their goal was uniqueness, to respect players' time and give them mysteries and puzzles to resolve. On kind of an overarching broad concept level, there are bigger mysteries at play. There are bigger puzzles that need to be unraveled with, quote, some really intriguing truths behind them. Ubisoft keeps hinting about some mystery with Eivor, and I'm sure it's relating to those who came before, the Isu, and the modern day storyline. On Twitter, narrative director Darby McDevitt confirmed that we can not only fish in our settlements, but also in many lakes and rivers. Anywhere there's a shore, we should be able to fish. And then on the topic of interactability in settlements, Ashraf confirmed that we can sit in different seats, interact with certain objects, and even lay down in our beds at camp. Once again, very Red Dead 2. Because of the time period, there is a lot of architectural diversity. Roman temples and towns were inhabited by Britannic and Celtic tribes. At the same time, Christian Saxons used these ruins and made what's called wattle and daub huts. We've seen these throughout the gameplay and CG trailers, but what this refers to is a woven lattice of wooden strips called wattle, which is daubed with a sticky material usually made of a combination of wet soil, clay, sand, animal dung, and straw. While there wasn't a ton of verticality with the architecture of the time, in larger cities like London, Winchester, and Jorvik will have opportunities to climb Saxon palaces. There will be some vertical navigation there. The PlayStation Magazine article has a lot of hypotheticals, so I'm not sure if this is complete BS or not, but there's a suggestion that heading to the tattoo parlor is connected to some sort of secretive online feature that Ubisoft has yet to reveal. Again, it seems a little far-fetched, but perhaps this is a hint at something we don't know yet. When we visit Stonehenge, we're going to be able to climb it and uncover the secrets of the ancient people who built it. At the same time, we may come across Neolithic tribes that still worship England's pagan gods. We're told that we have to explore in order to find them. They won't just appear. We know that the game's UI has been reduced, and discovering discovering secrets should be more instinctive and rewarding. There's a suggestion that maybe the game will have haptic feedback with the controller in order to signal treasure locations. When we're exploring, we can also use Synin to scout monasteries for plunder. Onto combat and progression. Ash confirmed that we'll fight 25 different enemy archetypes, consisting of elite and minion variants. We've seen several screenshots showcasing the variety in the enemies of this game, lots of quotes talking about how important that was for the combat and the evolution of the franchise. Similar to Origins and Odyssey, the skill tree will have 3 different archetypes. It's not as, quote, defined as Odyssey, but they've completely exploded the number of possibilities. This is in line with what we've heard before, that there are 400 skill points to spend in Valhalla, and that skills in the skill tree will be more granular than before. Valhalla will have a similar control scheme to Origins and Odyssey, namely with the combat options. Those were mapped to the shoulder and trigger buttons. In both games, the shoulder button was the quick light attack, while the trigger was the heavy, slower attack but dealt more damage. While the control scheme is similar, we'll have to see if that's exactly how it works in Valhalla. We also know that there will be a new tool wheel system. This is a throwback to a system we used a ton in this series before Origins, before the reboot. Functionally, this was kind of replaced by the way that abilities work in the newer games with Bayek, Alexios, or Cassandra. To me, this kind of suggests that tools and gadgets will be a lot more in line with how they used to work. You just have a lot of different options to use in any given situation. In terms of progression, Ash said that Ubisoft carefully avoided progression walls that would keep players from accessing parts of the game that they're interested in. Players should be able to finish the main story without grinding or needing to side quest if that's what they want to do. When asked about microtransactions, Ash said they're not talking about it yet, but that he wants to earn every single penny from people who pay for the game. This is in reference to the controversial microtransaction that existed in Odyssey, which offered the player 50% bonus experience for $10. Ubisoft defended the existence of this microtransaction, saying this is for people who want to progress through the story more quickly. I'm sure I've mentioned this once or twice before, but I absolutely expect similar MTX to be in Valhalla. I just hope that Ubisoft hides it, puts it in a place that if people want that, they can seek it out, but don't throw it in our faces. Don't be predatory and prey on people. Onto some narrative and story details. Ubisoft's philosophy for designing Valhalla was not to follow the structure of the last 2 games of Origins and Odyssey. They wanted to look at the way players explore their worlds. They wanted to challenge the idea of anchoring the player to a certain part of the map, a certain region for a few hours at a time. That's where they came up with the settlement narrative structure, where major quest lines will begin and end. Because of this, the structure is very different. A lot of quests will come from the settlement. We might receive information about what's happening in the world, whether it's from our contacts, people we've known in the past, or new opportunities. The game's many quest arcs will involve a layer of political strategy, which was accurate to the Vikings in England at the time. They were an essential piece in the chessboard of conflict in England at the time. We also know that quests will not always lead to violence. We'll get embroiled in those politics. Sometimes there are options to negotiate and avoid violence. After all, the ultimate goal of the settlement is peace, and forging alliances is key to that. But there are plenty of enemies who will not negotiate, which confirms there's going to be a lot of combat, a lot of fighting. When asked about the advanced AI systems introduced in Origins, Ash said that everything for Valhalla is being built on top of previous games and pushed much further. One of the big pushes there is with the settlement. So everyone there is meaningful to us. They have a name, a face, they have relationships, and we have the ability to get to know them, to get to understand their lives, their purpose, and how we deal with growing a settlement of real people. When asked about choosing between a male or female ʻeɪvɔːr, Ash said there's a narrative decision, a narrative meaning behind this choice. He confirmed that, like Odyssey, the lines of dialogue are the same. It's not going to change whether we're a male or female ʻeɪvɔːr. Ever since the official reveal, people have criticized the name ʻeɪvɔːr as both a male and female name. A lot of people that are from Scandinavia have been like, no, ʻeɪvɔːr is typically a female name. Darby McDevitt on Twitter responded to this criticism, saying that Ubisoft chose ʻeɪvɔːr's name for a very specific reason. So this isn't just a lack of research or a lack of knowledge. We will understand and figure out the mystery behind ʻeɪvɔːr's name. It was a deliberate choice. Valhalla's story is meant to explore how Vikings meant to cohabitate and adapt to the English way of life. This is in stark contrast to many invaders throughout history who meant to colonize and subjugate the people that lived there before. Vikings were different, and the story is meant to explore that idea. On Twitter, Darby suggested that we should expect more historical members from the Great Heathen Army to appear in the narrative. As we know, this series loves to play around with historical characters. It has a lot of fun doing that. So we should expect more of the same in regards to the Great Heathen Army. We believe we saw Guthrum attacking Alfred the Great in the gameplay trailer. That's something I pointed out in a previous video. Digging deeper into the history, we know that Ragnar Lodbrok's sons led the Great Heathen Army in order to seek revenge, because Aella of Northumbria actually killed Ragnar by casting him into a pit full of venomous snakes. While Ragnar's stories are considered by modern academia to be fictional based on myths and sagas, his sons were historical figures. It's not a stretch to expect some of them to make an appearance. When asked about the historical sources for creating the narrative of Valhalla, Darby said that the plot was an invention of Ubisoft, but the tone, style, and characterizations were inspired by lots of sources, many of which are listed here. It's a lot of sagas and myths depicting the Viking side, whereas the English side is mostly from historical accounts from the Anglo-Saxons. When asked if database entries would return in Valhalla, Darby said, "Let's just say I missed the database too." Again, we can interpret this either way, as yes, he misses it so it's going to be there, or he misses it because it's not going to be there. But I will say, I've been playing through the entire series. I am on Assassin's Creed 3 now, and one of my favorite things to do is pause every single time something pops up on the screen to read, to understand the history and context behind what I'm seeing. I would absolutely love to see database entries return. In an interview with PlayStation Magazine, Darby says that very early on, Eivor meets an assassin and starts to learn about the Brotherhood and the Order of the Ancients. Valhalla is supposed to bridge the gap between the Hidden Ones and the Order of the Ancients, which were proto versions of the Templar and Assassins, with the more modern versions. This is to ensure that these factions are historically consistent when looking at the broader series. Ubisoft took care to fill this world with meaningful connections to a lot of Assassin's Creed games that happened before and after Valhalla. Some things will set the stage for what happens in games to follow. Darby promised that this will be satisfying for Assassin's Creed fans. There's quite a number of moments where our jaws will drop and we'll say, "Oh, that's how that connects to that? Okay, that is cool." Rather than shoehorning the conflict between Templars and Assassins into the broader story arc, Valhalla's lore is seeded into the world. Darby said he wants fans to be able to wander through the world and really feel that they're discovering something that increases their knowledge of the whole. Every single narrative discovery has some kind of grand purpose. Darby says that the Vikings pick a spot to settle for, quote, "a very specific narrative reason," and that once we settle, we'll have two main approaches to exploration once we begin. The first is by raiding, bringing back resources in order to build new structures in our settlement, like a blacksmith, a stable, or cultivating farmland. I believe this is the first time we've heard about a stable or any kind of cultivating of food, so these are interesting concepts that I believe are new. He went on to say that when we build these new buildings, new characters will show up to give us services over time. It's a fairly extensive system. The second approach is about coming together, needing to make friends and alliances with nearby kingdoms and clans, and he suggested that we may need to subdue different parts of the country in order to achieve our goals. And there's a subtle hint there that we'll have to deal with people outside of the Saxons and the Vikings. We get more clarification on questing in the settlements. These are for long-form quests, so these are big narrative arcs which fit into the broader story, but they could also be sprawling stories that expand the world and our skills. This could involve building alliances with a neighboring territory. Darby McDevitt refers to the narrative structure as a flower petal, because as Eivor, we're going to go out from our settlement, spend a few hours in the world, do whatever activities we want, and then circle back around and come back to the settlement. And we're going to keep doing that many times in different locations where which pretty much forms a flower petal. He said some side stories adopt the Shakespearean 5-act structure. We'll have a simple errand that could spiral into an epic saga. He said the team produced fantastic results where they have great multiple part stories that feel like they have a true rise and fall, just like a Shakespearean play. Overall, Darby ensures we'll feel more engaged with the characters and invested in their problems. Many quest givers will remain in the world and could even become a part of our settlement, or they could just share how the world has changed. Darby said he hates fetch quests for characters that end up vanishing after you complete whatever they ask you to do. He wanted to make sure that characters we meet are more memorable and that we're likely to remember them for a long time after. When compared to previous games, there are going to be greater scales of gray to who we're fighting against. For example, Alfred the Great is going to go on a very personal journey of his own. He's more of an antagonist than a villain. Darby said that he's a complex guy and one of his favorite characters. Alfred's journey is at the heart of this story because of the massive amount of influence he had in this region at the time. Division plays a big role in the narrative for Valhalla, and that's no different in the settlements. There's a few overlapping parallel storylines described as a movie that has an A and a B plot. One layer of that is the evolution of the settlement, and as it grows, we're gonna have to deal with those growing pains and make some tough decisions. There's also a suggestion, I believe this is by PlayStation Magazine and not Darby, that Eivor and his clan could have greater enemies, greater threats than Alfred. So there's going to be kind of an overarching conflict, maybe like the end of the world was bigger than the Assassins versus Templars in Desmond's arc. In terms of influence, Darby took a lot from the Icelandic sagas for events that occur in Valhalla, particularly Egil's saga. Apologies if I mispronounced that. He drew a lot of influence from that story, which relates to a history of generations of one man's family as they fight with Viking kings and royalty. Darby elaborated on romances. They are returning to Valhalla, but he wouldn't confirm whether we could use those romances to foster alliances between kingdoms. It's been suggested that we could marry off parts of our settlement in order to secure those things, but we don't know if we can do that for Eivor specifically. Darby likes to call the hidden blade in Valhalla the conspicuous blade because it was important in Norse culture to show off that you killed someone, to be upfront about your actions. This is further justification as to why it's worn on the outside of the arm instead of the inside. Historically, we know that the Vikings converted to Christianity, and in the game, some of the Vikings we meet have sought peace with Alfred and decided to adopt that religion. There's a suggestion that conversion to Christianity plays a larger role in the narrative. Perhaps members of our own settlement will want to convert, and we may need to make that decision whether we're open for our people to convert, and that may affect trade deals as well as alliances with other kingdoms. We've heard a lot already about how Ubisoft is approaching mythology, but we've got further confirmation it's going to be treated more like Origins than Odyssey. Gods exist within the world through the beliefs of characters. So odds are we're not going to walk into Atlantis, for example, and talk with a bunch of gods. It's going to be a lot more grounded. For our last two extra bits of information, a tipster gave Kotaku's Stephen Totillo details about Valhalla late last year that turned out to be correct. However, one thing that hasn't been revealed yet is the ability to fight Norse gods in dreamlike sequences, which is very similar to the Snake mission in Origins. The only thing Ash said in response is that he doesn't talk about rumors, so it very well could be the case, but at the same time, tipsters aren't always correct with every single bit that they give. To cap off this video, we have confirmation from Ashraf that Valhalla is still on its targeted pace to release holiday 2020 despite what's happening in the world. They've had to make some adjustments, but all in all, it's not derailed the schedule. That was 50 more things you need to know about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I expect there will be new information revealed over the next month and a half, so we'll probably make a few more videos like this before the Ubisoft Forward event on July 12th. If you learned something new and found this video useful, remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned because we'll have many more Assassin's Creed videos. Be sure to follow me on social media. I've had it pop up I think once in the video before now, but I talk about a lot of news and games coming out soon. I've also got an official Discord where you can discuss anything you'd like, including Valhalla, so check out those links in the description below. I want to give a big thanks to my patrons, Bill, Grass, Taste the Wine, Jackie, Spyro, and Kamal. all for supporting me as a creator. I launched my Patreon a month ago, and it has lots of exclusive content like updates on new videos and behind the scenes videos that only get to be seen if you're a patron. So if you want to support me further, check that out, link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.